So Reginald Scott, please keep doing what you're doing. It's valued.
Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here. Welcome to the video. Great to see you all again, and I hope you're all doing stupendously well today. So I've got a bit of an interesting one for you today. I recently did a response video to GCN where they were slating old bike tech. Specifically, they were really mean about the square taper bottom bracket, and I think I set the record straight on square tapers. One thing I did say was there was a couple of issues with square taper, and in my opinion they were completely solved or resolved by what followed, which was called the Octalink crankset. And what should sidle into my shop for servicing but an old giant, what is it, Defy 9 is it or something, aluminium frame with an Octalink crankset. So I thought, you know what, this is a fantastic opportunity to do some service work on this bike, put it on video, and show off the Octalink crankset, try and explain how it worked, what was special about it, and why I think that it was possibly the best solution for a bottom bracket system. I really like the Octalink. I don't quite understand why they got rid of it. I mean, I kind of can, kind of can't, but I think it was a great system. And this bike is fantastic because it's a 9-speed. It's got a Sora group set, Sora 9-speed. As you can see, it's pretty filthy. I've disconnected the chain from the crankset here, so I can show you the bottom bracket in more detail. And watch this crank, right? Not serviced yet. I will try and improve this if I can. Yep, still going. It's not as good as some of the square tapers I get in, but it's not half bad, is it? I mean, does your crank spin that well? So I'll see what I can do to it. I can probably make that even better. Oh yeah, and before I forget, if you enjoy this kind of content, please do like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with a friend, and of course, comment below if you would like to. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can find several ways to do so at the link below at the Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can donate money or spend money on certain products that I make available there. So there you go. If you would like something from there, just click on the link and go check it out. Right, on with the video. Thank you. Okay, folks, the bike has come back from the wash, which is the first stage of any bike service for me, giving the bike a really good clean. If you want to know how to wash a bike, I will link below a couple of videos that I've done on that. And she's looking a lot better. Please forgive the noise coming from outside. My daughter's playing just outside the window. But yeah, she's almost looking shiny now. The chain is tarnished. It had some surface rust on it, but it's not too bad, to be honest with you. It's mostly discoloration. And the rollers look pretty good, as do the pins. So I'm not too concerned about that. The chain is fine. I've checked the chain, and the chain is perfectly good for wear. There doesn't appear to be any wear issues with the chain. So we're going to leave that chain there for now, unless the customer wants me to change it, but usually they don't. So the cassette is looking a lot better after the clean. So are the components. You'll notice there's no gear cable here in the rear derailleur, and that is because I've encountered my first problem with the bike, and that was the front shifter here was not shifting for the rear derailleur. It was basically going up 2 positions, and then it was just stopping, and no matter how much you turned or pulled on this lever, it didn't do anything. So usual fix for this is very simple. Silicon lubrication, silicon spray lubricant sprayed into the mechanism, and a little bit of work in it usually brings it around. That didn't work this time, so what I had to do was, if you just squeeze the trigger here, you can see in there where the head of the gear cable usually goes in. I stuck a probe in there, and I moved the mechanism manually with the probe while working the trigger and while spraying silicon spray in there. And that has brought it back to life. So now it moves beautifully and it's very smooth. So silicon spray is possibly the best way of refreshing these sticky shifters. If you ever get a sticky shifter, I'll just show you the spray can. So you know what I'm talking about. Here we are, silicon spray. It's just a general lubricant. And this stuff works wonders on these old shifters if you ever get a sticky one. Another issue that I noticed with the bike was when I was taking these pedals off, you'll see rather a large chunk of aluminium there. You see that ring of aluminium? That is because somebody cross-threaded this pedal. Happens quite often with flat pedals, I notice. I'm wondering whether it's because A, the kind of people that use these pedals are fairly new to cycling, so they make simple mistakes, or perhaps the bikes that are usually fitted with these pedals tend to be fairly cheap, and so again, the bike shops are careless when they install them, or it could just be the difficulty of the pedal spanner on this nut here and trying to get it in straight. But a lot of the time I find when I remove flat pedals from bikes, they have damaged threads. So this was the thread that was damaged. You can see that there's a little bit of material actually taken off from the inside there. Didn't look very good. So I chased it out with my pedal tap, okay, just to clean the hole up. Then I used a soft brush in there to clean that up. And once that's got some copper grease in there, which it had no grease, it was completely dry. Once I've got a bit of copper grease in there and we rethread it, it should be absolutely fine. I will of course encourage the customer to move over to proper cycling pedals at some point, proper roadie pedals, but flats are okay for now. Right, the next job is to put back that cable, check the shifting, and then this to me looks a little bit high. It's rubbing on the chain even when it's in the full retracted position. So I don't like that. I think I can improve that. And as I say, it looks a little bit high off those teeth to me. So I think I can improve the shifting of this front derailleur. So that front derailleur will be adjusted. I may in fact ask the customer if I can change this cable, because as you can see, there's a little bit of a break in the cable. It might be advantageous to put a new one in. We'll see what they say. And then after that, it's time to remove the crank and we can have a look in detail at the Octalink system. Oh yeah, there's one more thing. We're missing a seat post bolt, but that's fine. I can stick one of those in, no problem. And that will also be greased up with a bit of copper grease as well. Okay, so I've moved the bike to the kind of bike stand that supports the bottom bracket and clamps the front of the fork of the bike like that. The reason why this is the best kind of bike stand to use when you're doing work on the bottom bracket or on the crank here is because it supports the entire bike. If you use one of those bike stands that just clamps the seat post and you start wrenching on bolts down here, there's the strong likelihood of doing damage to the bike frame or to the seat post. So this is definitely the way to go if you want to do serious work on your bottom bracket. To remove an Octalink system, you're going to need a 10mm hex bit or Allen key. This one I'm using a socket with a hex bit on it. That goes in there. And then I have this wrench here with a ratchet system on it. So to take off this crank, we're going to remove this bolt. Don't know how tight it's going to be, but we'll soon find out. Hopefully it's not too bad. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing this. One way is pulling it together, and another way is sort of pushing away from you. That's how I like to do it. I like to get hold of the crank arm and the socket set, put them in my hands, and then just squeeze. And that wasn't too bad at all. Also, you can use like clamps and things on this, or you can use a cheater bar. With a cheater bar or a breaker bar, you will need some way of locking this in position. Usually I put cable ties on the crank, and then I cable tie the crank arm to this pillar here before I then stick my tool in here. That way I can get as much leverage on it as possible. So there is the central bolt. Now this bolt isn't incorporated with any kind of crank puller. This has been greased, which is good. And the grease looks green, so maybe the original grease there. Just a hollow bolt. So now we've got that off, what's inside here is a little threaded hole. That threaded hole is to accept your crank puller. You will need a crank puller to remove a Octalink crank. So for this stage, you'll need your crank puller. This is what a crank puller looks like. This one usually I'm just using for things like square tapers, but it comes with this additional little plug that goes in the end there, and that helps pushing off something wider like this Octalink. Make sure that your threads are clean on your crank puller when you thread it in. I actually like to put a little bit of grease on the threads on this to help it smoothly go in. Be careful, obviously, because if you damage the threads on your crank, you can prevent yourself from removing it in the future. Let me just clean up the threads on this and apply some grease. This crank puller has seen an awful lot of action over the years. Just going to thread that in slowly. Comes with a little knurled section on here. Should be biting. There we go. If you're having issue getting a fine thread into something, just back it off a little bit, reverse the threading, and then try again. Usually it goes into place. All right, there we go. Now, that doesn't need to be tightened up too much, just needs to be sort of finger tight on there. It's this part here that is going to need to be tightened. As I tighten up this bolt here, it will drive this pin against the axle, and it will push the crank arm off, or at least that is the theory behind it. I can feel it going. It is rather tight. There we are. Making progress. It's getting easier, so we're obviously coming away. Right, I think I can just turn it like this now. Be careful when they finally pop off, because you can drop them if you're not careful. It's coming. And there it goes. It's actually left the end of my crank puller wedged in there. I'll get that out in a second. Okay, so now we've got the crank arms off. I'm going to start with the non-drive side to remove the bottom bracket. To do that, you'll need your bottom bracket removal tool. Okay, make sure those splines are all the way in, or those teeth are all the way in, because you don't want it to come out while you're working. And to remove one of these with BSA, both for the drive side and the non-drive side, you want the tool to push forward towards the front of the bike. Okay, when you're tightening, the tool will go towards the back of the bike. When you're loosening, it will go towards the front of the bike like that. That's the easy way to remember which direction these things turn. And for this, I will be using a very large breaker bar. So this is just a very long aluminium tube, and inside I've got a big nylon tube that goes basically over my tool, protects my tool, and then the aluminium tube goes over the top, locks in like that. Then all I have to do is push down on this end, and it should be, these are usually very tight, but with this in here, it should be very easy. You can do it one-handed. There we go. Be careful, obviously, not to hit the fork. So I put my hand around it so that my fingers brush up against the fork. If anything happens, then it's not going to get damaged. There we go. That should be enough. Don't need that anymore. Okay. Should be able to come up. There we go. Should be able to just unscrew this now by hand. And by the look of it, this has been well lubricated as well. I'm beginning to wonder actually whether this bike was very hardly used or something. Oh no, we have some rusting. We have some rusting inside there. Okay, so I was just about to undo the drive side, and I couldn't get my tool all the way in because there was a little metal fragment or something stuck in one of the teeth. So if you do have a dirty keyway, you can use an old toothbrush or something just to rub in there and try and brush out any particles of grit or sand, or like that was a piece of metal for some reason. There's a shiny piece of metal in the keyway there, stopping me from getting my tool inside. But with a little soft brush, you should be able to get everything out and be able to get your tool in. Always have a towel with a little plastic tray or something underneath the bottom bracket when you're doing this kind of job, because often there's sludge or water or dirt inside here, and as soon as you remove the bottom bracket, it can come pouring out like that onto the floor. You see the water dripping off the bottom bracket? That's where water collects, and you can see we've got a little bit of rust here. Okay, now the bottom bracket is off the bike, I can show you all the parts and explain a bit more about the Octalink system and what was good and bad about it, and perhaps where it would have gone if they had stayed with this particular technology rather than moving over to sort of the Holotech. So this would be the Holotech version of a threaded bottom bracket. This one doesn't have any covers on it, but that's good because we can see the cartridge bearings in here. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Let's first off talk about this crank set here. So this is the Octalink crank set, and this one is a triple, which I absolutely love. And I'm realizing with this bike that the majority of the damage to the bike is from neglect more than it is usage, because these teeth on here look almost new. Like they're very, very fresh looking, very little wear on them. There's a bit of scuffing, obviously, where they have used them, but you know, that's moderate usage at best. I think the rest of the damage to the crank and things is just age. I just think moisture has attacked the surface of this aluminium crank. Now, this is obviously a very cheap Octalink crank. You can get some really beautiful ones, especially the Dura-Ace and things like that. But these are solid aluminium arms on these. But these can be made a lot lighter. I mean, this is a heavy one, but these obviously get significantly lighter. And nowadays, with, you know, titanium and 3D printing technology and carbon fiber, this crank could be made a lot lighter if you were still continuing with this technology. So with the Octalink system, you have this keyway here. These basically teeth or splines in here, 8 of them, and correspond with the 8 that are on here, and the 2 basically just fit together like that. Now, as you tighten down the bolts, which are these get pushed on, and they're extremely tight, and there's basically no movement in here. So once these two keyed parts are together, there's no twisting or movement in this crank whatsoever, and it eliminates any of those issues that some people were getting with the square taper system, which is why they went to this. And you can see that the next generation, the Holotech crank spindles with those very, very fine splines, you can see where they got the idea from, or where they were going with this design. That this is the intermediate position between the square taper bottom bracket and the modern Holotech system. So there you go. These axles obviously are quite heavy, because although they're hollow and wider, they are lighter than the square tapers, but they're still quite heavy because this is still a significant piece of steel here, and it's surrounded by a steel body as well. Now, there were different versions of the square taper bottom bracket made. Some had 2 removable threaded cups. Okay, so if you see this threaded cup here, this is actually a plastic cup, but this one fits over this end basically. And the reason why you remove the non-drive side first is because you put the drive side in, which is fixed, and then this cup goes over the top and is threaded in as much as you need to hold the other side of the bottom bracket in place, because this measurement can vary with discrepancies in frames and things like that. So it was good to have a cup that was removable and allowed you to take up any of the slack basically in the system. With the square tapered ones, the original ones, they didn't have any ridge like this one has. This one has a little step here or ridge. Those ones could be driven all the way in so that they were nice and snug. With this system, they've gone for a plastic one with a lip on it. But what was interesting is if you look here, you can actually see how much of this cup was screwed in. And there was this gap here at the back where basically it wasn't screwed in anymore, because that was the stopping point there, and there was this gap. So when this thing was closed, it wasn't closed all the way. So it wasn't possible for it to be completely butted up against the frame. But having a plastic cap in some ways is good, because if there is any movement in it, it's not going to creak or groan or anything like that against this metal surface here. Of course, you would cover this in a bit of grease to prevent that from like making any sound. Okay, so this Octalink system is significantly heavier than the Holotech system we have now, but a lot lighter than the square taper system that we had. And that's for a few different reasons. So number one is they increased the diameter of the axle, or the spindle, and they hollowed it out. Okay, so that made it much lighter than the square taper, which was a more solid, basically a solid bar of steel with squared ends. And they put these splines in there, these 8 splines. But if you compare this with, say, the Holotech micro spline, or very much smaller splines on the Holotech system, you need a lot less material to make those splines or to cut those splines out. Whereas these are quite substantial splines. They're very thick. And so you need more material on the axle in order to cut those deeper, wider grooves. So that also makes it heavier, because it's a thicker axle. It's a bigger, beefier piece of machinery. And on the square taper bottom brackets, some of them had bearings which were sealed units like this one. So the balls were held in place by a cage, and they were running directly on the axle, which is how this is. And the other side of the balls are running in a race, which is basically this steel tubing here. Okay, so the race is cut into this piece of steel here. Now, they also had cartridge bearing versions, which were pressed up against the steel body here. And so you could actually remove or knock out those cartridge bearings and replace them. And so balls were not running directly on the axles. This system, the balls are running directly on the axle. And as I say, they're held in place by a plastic cage, which is down in there. Let me just get a torch. Maybe we can get a bit more light on this. And you might be able to just about see that plastic cage in there. So that plastic cage, if I rotate the axle, can you see it going round? That is where the balls for the bearing sit or lie. Now, this one I'm not going to service because it's just not necessary. Look how fresh and green that grease is. This thing is like a new bottom bracket, so there's really no reason to service it, and it's spinning absolutely fine. There's no play in it. It's very smooth, so this is all good. But if I were to need to service this, it's a little bit tricky. And this, I think they could have definitely improved by having a cartridge system, like, cartridge bearing system, like some of the square taper bottom brackets. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this. They are very, very reliable, but they are a bit more difficult to service. Now, it's difficult to get this cover off. I've actually gotten the cover off this side. So there's a cover that sits on this side, and I got this one off by prying it very gently with a screwdriver. And then once I got it a little bit away from the body of the bearing, I could just pull it straight off with my fingers, hopefully not damaging this plastic, sort of hard plastic washer or cover. And then behind that cover was this one, which has got soft rubber lips on it and has got a metal back to it. So this actually goes over the top here and sits in that hole, and it acts as a second seal for these seals here. So this one integrates with the rubber lips on that seal there and provide a more watertight barrier, basically. That one I got out by sticking a little probe in there, a little pick, and just lifting it out, basically, very carefully going around the seal so as not to bend it. So that's come out straight, which is great. And then the next job would be to get in here and try and pull out this cage, Once you pulled the cage out, okay, the plastic cage, which is a delicate maneuver, quite a difficult thing to do, you'll notice here, again, it's going to be difficult to see. Let me try and get some light in there. Can you see that hole that I've made that seems to be going through the plastic cage? Okay, so there's one there, another one there. So those are probably holding the balls in there. Each one of those holes is a gap, and behind those is probably where the balls are. You get your pick in there, and you've got to pry that out. And that's going to be very difficult to do. But once you get that cage out, you're left with the balls loose within the bearing, and then you can organize the balls so that you can get each ball out. Okay, once you've organized the balls into one side, you'll get a gap and you can start getting the balls out. Once you've got the balls out, you should be able to take the axle out. Okay, this one is much more difficult because this cover is recessed right down inside here. So this one will be very difficult to get out, and potentially you'll damage it by trying to get it out. So it's best to start with this side, with the non-drive side, okay? Right, so those are all issues, I think, with this system because it makes servicing very difficult, although it's more reliable than, say, for example, Holotech system, which has cartridge bearings in. These don't spin as well, in my opinion, generally, because if there's any discrepancy in the frame, these will be not aligned with each other. Okay, so if you imagine these two, they should be completely perfectly aligned in order for this system to work. Whereas with this very substantial axle, and the fact that the threading is integrated to this very substantial steel body, even if the frame was slightly out of line, once you put this thing in and got this plastic cover on, it doesn't really matter. Any small discrepancies will just be ignored by this thing. So that's an advantage of it in that respect. That's why these square tapers and these Octalinks generally spin so much better than the Holotech versions. Obviously, if you've got a perfect frame, the Holotech's going to spin quite well. But generally, these spin incredibly well. And you get bigger bearings with them as well. Bigger balls usually mean more efficient than the smaller balls. It's very, very reliable, right? With these big balls in here.
Who's big balls?
It's big.
Packed full of grease. And with this very substantial steel spindle, this thing is bomb-proof, right? Now, obviously, water can get into these, but water gets into these as well. So I generally find that these are a bit more reliable and a bit better at coping with dirt and water than these ones for some reason, but that's just my experience. They just shrug off that minor damage as well. Because the balls are so big...
Why do they call you big balls?
And because everything here is so substantial, if you do get some pitting to the racers or some damage to the racers, these weather that damage much better, I tend to find. Whereas once you get a damaged cartridge bearing, it's really noticeable. And there's only one option, which is just to pull it out and replace it. So if you do significantly damage one of these things, you have to replace the whole unit because the racers are actually part of the bottom bracket system. That's not necessarily a good thing because it's quite expensive to replace a bottom bracket. How could this have been improved? Well, one of the things I would have done with this is I think perhaps a more serviceable unit would have been better. And serviceability, you know, cartridge bearings are pretty good for serviceability. I think pressing cartridge bearings into this and having a very, very chunky Holotech axle, but with like the similar system to some of the square taper bottom brackets, which had two independent cups, so that you tighten both independent cups in, and that holds the cartridge bearings in place up against the tube. Then what you can do is make the tube out of a much lighter material. You can make it out of aluminium or titanium, which would reduce your weight. Same for the spindle. That could also be made out of titanium. So in the end, and as could the cups, to be honest with you, as could the threaded cups, they could also be made out of titanium. So if you made everything out of aluminium in the center, which is cheaper and lighter than titanium, and then on the ends, titanium cups with a titanium axle, that would have made this thing very, very light indeed. And it would have been bomb-proof, just like it is now. It would also have been more serviceable because you would have had cartridge bearings you could just easily throw away or remove. So these are a bit of a pain to service, like I say, but generally, you don't need to service them as much. I mean, this has been hanging around in this guy's bike for decades probably, and you can see that, yeah, the grease is still fresh and new. So there you go. A little bit of surface damage from rusting, but nothing significant. Nothing that's going to hurt this. I'll just give a close-up of the markings on here so you can, screenshot it or something if you need to get one. So it's a sealed cartridge unit. That means it's not a cartridge bearing, but the entire unit, the entire body of this thing is a sealed unit. Shimano just wants you to throw these things away, but you can dismantle them, like I say, with a bit of effort. That is the Octalink system. Okay, so now I'm going to clean out the bottom bracket shell and all the muck that's inside here. On the floor, I have an old towel and a plastic tray that goes directly under the bottom bracket. And then to clean out the BB, I have my steel tray with an old toothbrush that I'm going to place underneath while I scrub. And I'm going to be rinsing it out with a degreaser in this spray bottle. I'm using WD-40. I like WD-40 because it's really good on the metal. It basically breaks down any grease or grime in there. It's very effective at cleaning. And I recycle it as well, so it can be reused for this similar cleaning jobs like this. If you want to see how I recycle it, then I can do a video on that. So there we go, a little bit of that in there. And then we just scrub out all the threads and the inside of the bottom bracket of any muck and grease that's built up inside there. Okay. Like I say, I don't worry about how much I use because, like I say, I recycle it. So for this kind of cleaning job, it's fantastic. Those threads are nice and shiny. Right, once you've done that, you can get some paper towel and just dry it off. Let's see if any of this muck on the frame will come off with the WD-40. It might. Problem with white painted bikes is they get so easily stained. Every little scratch you get on your frame, dirt gets into it, and then it shows up with a fresh piece. Okay, once all your threads are clean and shiny, I'm just going to apply a little bit of copper grease in here. I'm only going to apply copper grease on the drive side because the non-drive side has a plastic retaining ring, and so there's no real reason to use copper grease for a plastic ring. It won't be of any benefit to it because copper grease is for metal on metal. So I'll be just using some aquaproof on the other side of the bottom bracket for the plastic ring. So put a little bit in here. Doesn't need to be too much because the threads on the bottom bracket itself are going to have copper grease on as well. So just a light smearing of copper anti-seize on this side. So we have some copper grease on the threads on the drive side, and we have a little bit of aquaproof, just a light smattering on this polished surface here. That's going to sit against the plastic cup, so I thought it pertinent to put a little bit of grease in there just to protect that in case there's any water or moisture inside the plastic cup when it rains or when somebody washes the bike. Just prevents water from getting in there. And also reduces sound if there was to be any sound of the thing moving, which is unlikely. So we shove that in there, and we'll be turning it towards the back of the bike to screw this in. It should go in very easily. Be very careful with these kind of things because it's always best to be gentle with them and take your time. If something's not going, back it off, try again. There we go. You see now it's going in just with my fingers. So there was an issue there. It wasn't in the threads correctly. You don't want to tighten or over tighten something. Always start off using the tool with your hand when you're tightening something like this. And as you can see, it should be easy like this. If it's not easy, there's a problem. If you're feeling strong resistance when you're tightening a thread, that could be bad news. And so stop, back it off, check, and try again. I mean, I'm able to tighten this all the way down to it till it stops with just my hands. So that's the way you should do it. And that was so easy because there's copper grease there just makes it slide beautifully. You can even get it pretty tight with just my hand. All right, now we'll get the socket set and finish it off. Some of you may wish to know a torque setting for this. It's anywhere from about 35 to 50 Newton meters, 50 being the maximum. Me personally, I don't use a torque wrench for tightening these up because there's no way I'm going to break this. I would really have to try hard to do this damage. I think my tool would probably slip out of the keyway long before I did it any significant damage. I'm just going to go by feel because I've done lots of these. But like I say, if you're at home and you want to use a torque wrench on this, you can. Just don't go any higher than 50 Newton meters. 35 to 50 is fine. 40, middle ground. But yeah, I'm just going to torque it up till it stops and not put any extreme pressure on it. I'm not using the breaker bar or anything. Just using the normal handle length. Like I say, the most important thing is making sure that the tool doesn't slip out because you've got very little bite on these teeth here. They're very shallow. So the most important thing is you keep the tool inside that keyway when you're tightening. And that's it. That's stopped. For the plastic lock ring, I've just put a little bit of aquaproof, waterproof grease on there, a little bit of aquaproof on the inside as well, just to seal the system and to prevent any noise. Not that this plastic ring should make any noise. It also helps you screw it in as well, having that bit of grease on there. And this should be easy enough to go in. Should be able to do it with my fingers. We're tightening in the same direction towards the back of the frame. And this one we will just tighten it until it stops. Getting a little bit difficult to turn it now. So we'll use the tool. These are all plastic teeth here, so you have to be very careful not to over torque it because you will just tear the teeth right off. Don't worry about excess grease coming out as you tighten it because that's just helping to seal everything up and it can be wiped off later. It's starting to get a bit tight now. There we are. Haven't felt it stop yet. Okay, that's stopped. Perfect. For the next part, putting back the crank arm on the spindle, I put a little bit of copper grease on the splines on the spindle and a little bit on the inside as well, so that when I slide the two parts together, they go on nice and smoothly. It doesn't matter which way around you put this. You can put them on any of the splines you want, as long as when you put the other crank arm on, it's obviously in the opposite direction. One arm going up, one arm going down, rather than both arms going down or both arms at a weird angle. So pop that on there, and then we have a washer that goes in. And now we need to put back our retaining bolt. So this will also have some copper grease onto it. There we go. And again, I'm starting this off with my fingers. Place that inside there. And start tightening with your fingers until that stops. And then for this one, I will be using a torque wrench. As you can see, this is a very large torque wrench. And this one will be to 35 Newton meters on this one, because you can do damage and tear off the threads on one of these bolts quite easily. Oh. So that is super easy with this big torque wrench. And the arm is going onto the splines. Make sure you've got it on the splines, by the way, before you start tightening. Don't tighten it with the two splines crossing each other, because then that will do tremendous damage. There we go. This time I'm going to lift up this crank arm on this side, so it's like at the 12 o'clock position, so that I can line my splines upon this side. So my crank arm is perfectly aligned, as you can see. It would be weird to have it going in any other direction. And then we can put our washer back in. And our threaded bolt. Starting off with our fingers. There we go. That one's all greased up as well. And then torqued up again, 35 Newton meters. You can go higher with this torque setting, but I like to keep it on the lower end. I find the low end is usually more than enough for most of these things, just like Holotech cranks. I always go to the low end of the setting. That's tight. There we go. My weedy cycling arms couldn't quite get that sitting down. Anyway, usually I do this standing up. It's a lot different when you do it sitting down. Okay, folks, I think I'm going to wrap it up there for today. I've finished the service on this bike. I didn't include everything I did on camera because, unfortunately, it takes too long to set up cameras and get lighting in position and things when I'm filming. So I just stopped messing around and got on with my job because I want to get this bike back to the customer. So I've done the headset off camera, the wheel bearings, the gears, the recabling, the brakes and all that sort of stuff was done off camera. But hope you enjoyed what you did see today. I will try and include the things that I've done on this bike in other videos and on sort of a how-to basis of how to do things. I've already got a video on how to service your headset, so if you want to know how to do that, check that video out. I'll try and pop it in the description below. So the bike's looking a lot better than she was. She's, significantly cleaner. All the gears are working nicely. The crank feels fantastic, as it did pretty much before, to be honest with you, because there was not really much to be doing with that. Everything's a little bit shinier. There is some discoloration to the paint and some paint damage that, unfortunately there's nothing I can do about it, because it's not just a case of cleaning. It would need a respray. But she's a great bike, and you could probably pick up a bike like this nowadays for a few $100s. What, like $300-400 people are probably selling these for now. And to put that in perspective, so this bike here, I've just weighed it, and it came in at 9.4 kilos. I'm not sure what size this is. Just a second, let me grab a tape measure. She is coming in at, what's that, 49? So this is very small frame. It's like an XS. But like I say, she's coming in at like 9.4. And to put that in perspective, if you were to walk in the Trek shop and buy a Trek, what was it? Imunda carbon frame 105 disc group set with the stock aluminium wheels and the carbon bar, stem and seat post and 105 clipless pedals, right? So imagine that bike in a very similar size to this, an XS size, like a 50 or a 49. That would cost you around 4,000 Brunei dollars, okay? And when I said this would probably cost you a few $100s, I'm talking Brunei dollars, which is a bit less than the US dollar. So about 4,000 Brunei dollars that bike would cost you, and that bike weighs 9.3 kilos because I had one in the shop and I weighed it. So that's with pedals. So this is only 100 grams heavier than a bike that would cost you today $4,000. Anyway, there you go, folks. Oh yeah, I bet the crankset spins way better on this than it does on that 105 Monda. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. As always, folks, please do stay safe when you're out riding. If you want to support the channel, you know how to do that. Link is below. And I do hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
You know, when you came in, I was watching a Reginald Scott video.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the video. Yeah, I was just
I
watching.
really like Reginald.
Yeah,
it's a great guy. It's very funny. I watch all his videos. I watch all the videos of Reginald, George,